I was asked if I would talk today. I wasn't clear on the title. I knew it was about the growth plan. I knew that's why you were here, and I knew that many of you, many of you were members of ratepayers groups, as well as having some professional interest in these matters. I thought what I might do. I know you've got a good agenda, and I was kind of shoehorned in here, so I don't want to upset it. Let me, if I could, try and give you what I think is an appropriate context for a discussion about the growth plan, and indeed about your own particular interests in your own particular communities as to how you go about dealing with the forces of change that are upon us and the kinds of tools we've got. I'll do it pretty quickly, but I want to put out a context. You're going to get lots of reports from people. I noticed in the back there's already some reports out there on the table. You're going to get more reports over the next few years. There are two reports that I want to make sure that you get a copy of. If you don't have one or it's online, you can get them. They are the two reports that have to do with the whole of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. The very first one is the one that Bob mentioned, and that is the Planning for Health, Prosperity and Growth was the title that we put on it. It was a report of the panel to look that was established in 2015 by the provincial government. The Greater Golden Horseshoe. It's a new sense, a new planning framework for the province. It's a new planning footprint for the province. These things keep changing. If you're from Toronto, you remember Toronto. Then you remember metropolitan Toronto. Then you remember the Greater Toronto Area. And then they had a thing called the Greater Toronto Hamilton Area, where they didn't include Niagara. So these things change, and they're like, in a sense, like styles, but they're very important. And the Greater Golden Horseshoe is a framework that is going to be with us for a very long time. And much of the work that you'll be engaged in, and those who come after you, will be trying to figure out how we go about the issues in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. I'm not very good at this, so I don't have a map. I'm not good at so I don't have a map. So I'm going to describe the Greater Golden Horseshoe for those of you who may not know its limits. It goes in the in the south from the Niagara Peninsula, Haldimand County, and Lake Erie. Into the north, Simcoe County, Georgian Bay, and the Bruce Peninsula. On the east, it goes from Northumberland County, Peterborough County, and Kawartha Lakes. And on the west, it goes over to Dufferin, Wellington, Brant counties, and Waterloo region. It's an immense area. Indeed, it's 2/3 of the population of the province of Ontario. And it's also one of the fastest growing and changing areas in North America. It is dominated in its land use planning by 4 major plans. Some of you will know this, some of you may not. But my point here this morning is to try and lay that basic framework that everybody can appreciate. The 4 land use plans are the Niagara Escarpment Plan of 1985, the Oak Ridges Moraine Plan of 2002, the Green Plan of 2005, and the Growth Plan of 2006. The last 2 were required to have a review within 10 years. And so in 2015, the province of Ontario established a panel, and asked me to chair it, established a panel to look at all 4 plans. That covers the whole of the Greater Golden Horseshoe, to integrate the language, because sometimes the language makes a difference, and that's important to planners and lawyers. So the important thing was to make sure that we're integrating the plans and using similar language. But the major crank for the job to be done was to look at the next 25 to 30 years and see what the forces of change would bring to the Greater Golden Horseshoe and make a number of recommendations on how we should at least try and go about it. It was an extensive process. I won't belabor it with you, but at the end of it, I think it was in the order of 42,000 submissions were made through endless numbers of meetings, town hall meetings, et cetera. So there was we were not prepared, actually, for the great interest that people had in such a vast region where it's hard to get your arms around, but they were. And out of it came a report, this report that I just mentioned. And that report, I call it land use in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, but if you're at Queen's Park, you call it the Coordinated Plan Review. Only Queen's Park can take a really good dance and bring it down. At any rate, it's the land use planning for the Greater Golden Horseshoe for the next number of years. What happened up until 2041, what happened, of course, because there was such a tremendous interest, the province, unlike most provincial or federal or indeed governments generally, they responded very quickly. And so you'll find another book. They're the only two I'm going to offer. Shaping Land Use in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. This is the province's response to this report. And if you take those two documents and whatever other reports come your way, connect them with these two documents because they will give you a context that will be very helpful to you. We had basically 7 themes that we put into the report. There were 87 recommendations. About 2/3 of those, almost 60% of those, were about land use planning. But we also knew that land use planning is not terribly important without understanding a whole series of other policies that make land use work. In simple terms, it's one thing to talk about the farm, but the farm doesn't matter what you say about the farm if the farmer can't make a living. So the important thing is to understand that this is a series of recommendations that not only deal with land use, but deal with the texture of land use, deal with the consequences and the implications of land use for transit and a whole host of other policies, which is why it was not only from the Municipal Affairs and the Housing Department that we worked with, but 6 other ministries. So that's why it's worth your attention. The 7 themes. First of all, growing the Greenbelt. What does that mean? How do you go about it? What is required by municipalities? What is required by citizens groups, etc.? We have things to say in terms of growing the Greenbelt. Secondly, it's a framework for economic growth. And let me, as a sidebar, I've been in this for a long time. I love people who only talk about the environment because at the end of the day, we all agree. And I love people who only talk about the economy because at the end of the day, it's not difficult to agree. And I love people who talk about community because if they don't talk about the other two, that's pretty simple too. The hard work is trying to bring, I sound like Justin Trudeau, I think, but you got to bring them together. And as you see on your nightly television, bringing them together is not easy, but that's the work to be done. Thirdly, it's about building complete communities and retarding sprawl. Urban sprawl has been a costly experience. It was helpful and useful in many ways, but it's now costing us in a way economically and socially that everybody agrees you need to change it in the building of complete communities, which we have definitions and recommendations in the report. 4, productive agriculture and food security. 5, protection of natural heritage and natural water resources. 6, mainstreaming our response to climate change. And 7, linking this seems like a no-brainer, but it's linking infrastructure investment to land use policies and planning. That's almost automatic, but of course we've seen experience not only here but around the world where we don't make that simple connection between investment in infrastructure and the land use planning that's also occurring. And then finally, along with other than the 7 themes, we made some recommendations to have this not simply go away as another report that was of interest and go to the universities to be taught to future generations but never used. And there are some of us who are old enough, there's nobody else in this room as old as I am, so I can say this without fear or favor. I remember the 1970 Toronto-centered Region Plan. It was a terrific exercise in regional planning, but it died. Not because it wasn't a good idea, but because there was a public that was not aware of it, did not grab it, did not push politicians, and politicians who took the line that they felt they needed to take, and slowly we strangled the Toronto Centre Region Plan. So we put in two recommendations at the end, 86 and 87. We said there needs to be an oversight body that pushes the government to keep this in mind as they go about their business in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and to make sure that they begin to reorganize even internally, so that we're not going to be siloed to death. Because sometimes you go to governments and it's not one-stop shopping, it's like a mall. Right? So we wanted to both reorganize the government if we could. It's not our business, but we wanted them to go take what is known as machinery of government initiatives to bring things together so it's more simply dealt with internally. But what would push it was a body that was an oversight body. Interesting enough, that did not take long. The ministry of the day and the government of the day responded to that. And so they adopted earlier this month a reorganization and a revamping of the Greenbelt Council. Thank you. Of the Greenbelt Council, which was established about a decade ago. They liberally expanded the terms of reference for that panel, and have established new membership in the panel. And they had their first meeting yesterday, which is why I'm here today. So, yeah, kudos to the government for doing so. If you look at the people who are involved, they are some of them, if you're into these matters, some of the usual suspects are there, but they're all talented people. And they're going to be pushing the government, whichever government that is, forward. Let me say this, if I could, and I'll take whatever questions you might have if I still have. Sorry? God, she's tough. 1 minute, she said. Okay. I just want to say this. Do not underestimate, if I could be so bold, do not underestimate the chances, the possibilities that are here. This is a historic opportunity to take a region in this globe and go at it in a way which it's seldom people have been able to witness in the history of the place. So I'm really glad that some of you are connected to on-the-ground activity, because that's what it's going to take. Okay? Thank you very much.